And good day, good night. Welcome to Euro Today for Friday, June 4th, 2021. Duane, we are 7 days away. 7 days away from the opening ceremonies of the Euro and the first kickoff of Turkey versus Italy. But first, how are you today?
I'm okay. Yeah. 7 days away, as you say. Hopefully, I'm really hoping, Kevin, that I can watch some Euro games on a patio. That's all I hope for. I know in most of our listeners you can, but I can't yet. I can't. So I'm hoping.
Yep, Duane is hoping, and I think we should be hopeful for Duane that he will be able to find a way to watch this on a patio legally in Ontario, Canada. Hopefully, wherever you are in the world, you're getting ready for this tournament. It's going to be maybe the biggest Euro ever. Today, Duane will finalize our look at all the groups with groups E and F with a lot of the contenders, and we'll look at the groups and their qualifying round results. We'll also look at two rules that have been clarified earlier today regarding the tournament. We'll talk about your favorite VAR and offside, but first, did you mention, Duane? I said offside and not offsides.
Oh, yeah.
I
American
got it right.
listeners, if you're new, I know that in the NFL, they call the rule in which you go over the line of scrimmage before the ball is snapped offsides. That does not mean that rule is called that in any other sport in the world. There is no S. I don't know why it's plural. I wish I could understand that. That's actually my biggest question in this is why is it plural in football? Like, well, that doesn't make sense either, but I get that that's what they call it.
Exactly. Anyways, but today we'll look at Offside and Var and how they deal with it in the Euro. But let's start the show by looking at another controversial aspect of the beautiful game, a rule that has been changed earlier this year in March by the International Football Association Board, football's lawmakers. We're talking about the handball law here, and we're talking about really the big change here has to do with accidental handball by a forward. And accidental handball to begin with, but the one by a forward in the build-up of a goal, it won't be penalized at Euro 2020, says UEFA earlier today. And we'll read some excerpt of Rossetti, who's a very important referee. He's the head of referee for the Euro competition, the oversight master of this competition rule. And Rossetti said in a briefing on Friday that football is also about controversial moments, and it's not always easy to define the line of interventions for our VARs. We want clear evidence to disallow goals. That's it. For factual decisions, we want interventions just if it's clear. So, match officials will also be expected to have a zero-tolerance approach for dangerous play, and in a situation where players surround officials, they should expect a minimum of one yellow card to be issued. But the big change here is the handball, the accidental handball, especially by a forward, leading up to a goal.
Yeah, and this was a rule change that will be implemented around the world starting with the next season. It wasn't 100% clear whether they were going to implement this in the Euro season because where does that fit, right? Like it's a summer tournament, so it's sometimes difficult to understand where that fits in. But MLS, for instance, implemented this change in the rule for the start of their season. Because the rule by IFAB was put in place in March. So it was before MLS got going back again. So they were able to implement it for the start of MLS season. So we have seen it. A lot of our listeners will have seen it. It's kind of a throwback to how the rule was before they changed the rule. But the thing about the handball rule is that they're always kind of changing the rule. So it's hard to keep track.
You're like, wait, what's the rule again? Which part of that rule are we in? Is it so... I guess that will be a big difference. But I also want, and maybe we can transition that conversation on handball to what should it be? You know the famous, I got the ball, I'm in the box, I don't have an option, there's a defender in front of me, and I kick the ball towards his hands, and I get a penalty. I'm glad this has been phased off, but we're still going to see people trying to do that during this tournament, and I hope that referees don't fall for it.
Yeah, and that's the problem with this rule, and it always has been the problem with this rule. Look, to me, I get philosophical when I start talking about the handball rule because you have to get, and historical even, because you have to go back to sort of understand the origin of it. Like it's what distinguished Football Association, soccer, from rugby league football, right? Like that's or rugby football or rugby league football that you couldn't pick the ball up. That was the main distinguisher between those games that evolved from the muddy fields of England back in 18 whatever. That's the difference. That's why the rule's there. So that rule was very much about deliberate handball. It was about like leaning down and picking the damn ball up. So obviously you can't do that. But in soccer, it's what does it mean? Does it mean if it hits it, is it automatically got to stop the play? Does it mean that you have to actually move your hand towards it? Like it always gets into this sort of subjective interpretation, and always has for years. And whenever you get into a subjective interpretation, people are going to argue it one way or another. The older I get, the more accepting I become of the fact that subjectivity is part of the interpretation of any rules. This is the main reason why I hate VAR, Kevin, is because I don't believe in the black and white, this is right, this is wrong way to call a game. I think that there is a level of humanness in it that allows people to subjectively evaluate, and there can be differences in how the handball rule might be called in England versus how it's called in MLS. There are differences.
Oh, yeah, there's major difference. And we've talked about this, but maybe now for our international listeners, because this is Euro today, in MLS, it's a little less intrusive. And I have found, and I'm going to speak for myself, and I'll let Duane talk for himself after, that the decision-making process feels a bit more subjective, where sometimes I'm looking at it and I'm like, no, this should be overturned. And the referee's like, no, play stands. You're like, well, it's the referee's decision, and he's stuck by it. That, to me, and you don't get as pedantic, and we're going to talk about this later on with the offside, is where you see the referee move the line an inch and then zoom in, move the line, zoom in. Eventually, we're going to have new technology, and that's going to start in the next few years, closer probably to what the Hawkeye is to what we have now. Maybe something to that extent we'll see down the road. But to me, what we see now with the pedantic aspect of, oh no, this is overruled, this is not overruled, I think you're right, to a point where there's still someone taking the decision looking at that screen. It's not like it's a robot, right? It's not like it's an AI, and there is still subjectivity. So we have to understand that and sometimes learn to live with. The clear and obvious, I guess, is there, and there is a margin of error usually in other aspects of society. What is a margin of error for VAR when it comes to offside, when we're talking about it, when it comes to handball? Is it different if you're in a certain part of a field? If you're in an offensive territory, is there a more probability, a higher probability that a handball by a forward would be accidental? Why the heck would you do a handball anyways? And when you're in defensive position, is it maybe a higher probability that the handball would be actual deliberate? So those are all things that needs to be considered when you're looking at this decision-making process. And at the end of the day, they want to favor goals and they want to favor the offense. So maybe that's why the accidental handball, especially the scenario done by a forward leading up to a goal, will not lead to a disallowed goal, like we've seen with Croatia in the World Cup final, or multiple times against Fulham, example earlier this year, or other aspect in the Premier League and other leagues around the world over the last few months.
Yeah, the biggest problem with the handball is it was called, is they were calling it differently on the same pitch, depending on whether it was an attack or defense. And you say that they want to favor defense, but they weren't. They were doing everything in their power to take goals away. And when we talk about offside in a minute, that comes out. Everything they've done with how they interpret offside with VAR has done nothing but take goals away, and goals that I argue should stand. I know if Alexi Lawless was on the show, he'd say it's either onside or it's offside. And I would say, well, no, you can't tell. Like, yes, but you can't tell. that's my answer to that. But
and then there's also the aspect of the angle of the camera and all. But let's transition now to offside. I think we've said all we had to do about the handball. We'll see how they deal with it. But here's an example, Duane, and this is a famous goal earlier this year. This is, of course, a Fulham player with West Ham, VAR moving the shoulder and the foot. They seemed equal. Then there's the line, then the other line, and then when you watch the broadcast, you see this move in real time. You see the technician and the VAR and his assistant. So the VAR and the AVAR, that's a lot of A's and a lot of R's, fiddling with the line. And then you're like, well, how precise is that thing if they have to fiddle like this live in front of millions of viewers? Well, they won't be finicking with it live. Finicking that's a new verb I just created. They won't be playing with it live on TV. They're just going to show it after they're done with it. Not that they're going to do it. They're going to do it, but just not live on the broadcast.
There you go. Just quickly to end my handball. I just wanted to say one last thing, and that's what I want to do with the handball rule is so dramatically different from how the handball rule is called that I think that it would blow half of the world of football's mind. Basically, I don't think it should be a penalty if it happens in certain parts of the box. And anyway, that's a big step in a very conservative sport. So moving on from that. Yeah, look, the issue with offside and VAR is that, as you just said, the technology does not allow us to determine the exact moment in which the ball leaves the foot. Is the simplest way to put it. So if you can't determine the exact moment the ball leaves the foot, you can then therefore not determine whether the player was ahead of the defender by millimeters in that moment. So you would have to have some level of subjectivity still has to go into this. And the problem is when you're drawing lines, you're taking subjectivity out or you're making it completely objective based on an arbitrary moment. And that to me is so painfully obviously ridiculous that I don't understand why they maintain this. And the only reason I can think of is because there is a lot of money involved in these games. There is a lot of, pressure and jobs are on the line and all that there just is this need, I think, this compulsive human need to find exact moments, to find black and white out there so that they can say this was wrong and this was right. And that leads to, having, finite decisions that can be defended by quote unquote evidence, but they're not, right? They're just not. And it's not helpful to the game. If they insist that offside should be part of VAR, to me, you need to eliminate all drawing of lines, and it needs to be eyes judging by what they're seeing on a screen.
Mm-hmm.
And this gets back to clear and obvious. And you talked about the difference between how MLS implements VAR right now and how certainly England does. And I think in a lot of ways, a lot of the world, a lot of our listeners are MLS listeners. Some might be new, and welcome if you are. If you're new, MLS has actually found a really good level for it this year. And I say this as someone who rallies against VAR all the time. I am not this isn't a come to Jesus moment for it. I've been with Jesus all along when it comes to not liking VAR, if that makes sense. Yeah, I hate VAR.
Duane's been wanting to fire it into the sun since its inception.
Since they were talking about it.
Since before. Yeah, its inception, yeah.
Yeah, I do not like video replay in sport. I think it harms it. I think it takes away the entertainment factor. I know that there are lots of people listening that think I'm insane for that don't understand how I can possibly be okay with errors. I am, because humans play the sport. Humans referee the sport. Humans make errors when they play it. Humans make make errors when they referee. I accept that. Anyway, but if you're insisting on it, you have to get back to clear and obvious. And if it's clear and obvious, then it's clear and obvious. It is Henry's handball. It is Diego Maradona's handball.
Well, yeah,
those are clear and obvious errors. And if you're just going to use VAR for that, I'm fine with that. I'm not going to accept it all. I'm not going to argue with that at all. And that's kind of where MLS is moving towards. After when it started, it was overcorrecting too. And I think that they found a way now this year where there are very few delays. The referees are not going to the monitors very often, and we certainly are not seeing lines being drawn on screen. Will we delay it for 5 minutes with no one in the stadium knowing what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
They need to get away from that.
Yeah, and I have seen lately also there's a certain quickness in the decision-making process this year compared to maybe last year. And maybe I can compare last year, but a couple years ago, in stadium example for a VAR situation, it was a bit longer, and you always had that mystery factor. You didn't know what was viewed or anything, right? And they've evolved to now there's like possibility to hear what's happening. If you're part of that group, you can, or there's a message and there's a Twitter handle that in real time will tell you why things are being reviewed. And Howard Webb is the director of Pro, which is the professional referees organization of North America. And Howard Webb has designed a communication pathway back and forth with media that it's actually better than it used to be. Is it perfect? No, but at least it gives you some information and also indication on screens for the broadcast. And it'll be the same for the Euro when it comes to the production values coming from Europe. We'll have more information of what play is actually being reviewed and then the lead up to that play. But yeah, less intrusive, I think, is definitely the way to go for VAR. And we will see the implementation of that also being used in all of VAR's implementation. And that's where VAR also gets a bad rap, Duane, because we see VAR on a day-to-day basis. But you remember Russia? It was different. When VAR gets used at that level with everyone watching, it's like the pressure is a little higher on everyone involved, virtual assistant referees included.
Yeah, well, yeah, and the even better example of that is France, the Women's World Cup, where it was just a disaster. Like the way VAR was being used in that tournament was horrendous. It like the calls were worse, and that I think was directly related to the fact, and this is an unfortunate side effect of FIFA's mandate to help female officiating levels up by requiring females to referee the female tournaments. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that, because I do think that you need to address that. Otherwise, they'd never get the chance to get better. And the level of officiating in the women's game is getting better for that reason. But anyway, the fact is they're less experienced, right? And when you're less experienced, it goes all the way down. And that especially hits the VAR room, because VAR, by its nature, we're starting to see some VAR specialists. Mostly they're kind of referees that haven't quite reached the level where they'd be on the field yet.
Or well, what I also like about MLS is referees that are experienced, very experienced, and slowly transition. Before you transition to a higher role, maybe with your organization, or a behind-the-scene role, you transition to a video assistant referee. And let's not forget the referee part. VAR is the name of the person, and there's a person behind that screen that talks to the referee. And I think that's something we have to also remember heading into this tournament, where VAR will be influential on some results of group stage games, and for sure influential on results of knockout stage game. Let's be honest here.
Yeah, no, and you're right. And I think when you're talking about older referees, basically is what you're talking about, that maybe aren't physically able to keep up with the play anymore, being transitioned into a VAR room before they retire outright. And realistically, there's no physicality required for VAR. If it's going to stay, and it probably is, I kind of like that idea, because why would a referee have to retire before they'd retire in any industry at that point, right?
Exactly. And we're seeing this from multiple players. Well, just from David Gantar to others, I just say, in 2018, were part of the 2018 World Cup, and a lot of North American representative in the offices will take part also in the Euro 2020. Duane, let's have a little short break. When we come back, we'll look at Group E and at Group F, and also we'll give you the scores of the Nations League from yesterday, some international friendlies, and also setting the table for a long overdue Two Solitudes. That and more after this short break. You are listening to Euro Today with Duane Rollins and myself, Kev Laramie. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN. Subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube page, youtube.com/sports podcasting network. Oh, we're back. I'm Kevin Laramie, joined by Duane Rollins. As always, you can follow Duane on social media at 24th Minute, and you can follow myself at Kev Laramie, like I mentioned in the Bomber, this show at Soccer Today SPN. Before we dive deep into Group E, Duane, did you know that Switzerland were not neutral yesterday? Switzerland put a marker down against Liechtenstein 7-0 yesterday.
Liechtenstein's not exactly the biggest country in the world, but
literally, figuratively, in all aspects.
Yeah. Real quickly, someone just retweeted one of my tweets that's named Cheesecake Muncher, and I'm thinking to myself, I'd like a piece of cheesecake right now. That's a complete aside.
Thanks. I'm trying to watch what I eat. So yeah. Thank you very much. Ukraine 1-0 against Northern Ireland yesterday. Turkey 2, Moldova 0. Belgium, Greece 1-1. And Roberto Martinez, manager of Belgium, mentioned also yesterday that he does not expect Kevin De Bruyne to be fit for the first game of this tournament for Belgium, which means he probably won't be for the first couple.
Or maybe for the entire tournament, and they're holding him there as a sort of decoy in a lot of ways, which wouldn't be the first time we've seen this. And Kevin De Bruyne is a player that's good enough that you might want to keep around just in case. My selfishness is going to come through a little bit. I'm very disappointed for Kevin De Bruyne and for the tournament in general if he's not able to play. And I think that's a clear thing that we should be obvious. Like if you're out there like happy that maybe the best player in Europe can't compete, I mean, he's arguably right there right now, then I don't know what to say. You just hate Belgium. Who hates Belgium? The Belgium people think Belgians are dumb sometimes, which is unfair, of course, but I've never heard anyone hate them really. But anyhow, yeah. So it's unfortunate there, but my selfishness is kicking in a little bit as just make sure he's healthy for August. Is kind of where
Yes, because obviously, if you don't know, Duane's allegiance is with Manchester City, so Kevin De Bruyne is important for him in the club world. Before we continue Euro talk and Euro today for Group E, Duane, yesterday the U.S. men's national team won 1-0 against Honduras in the semifinal of the CONCACAF Nations League. Theosin Sibachu scored at the 89th minute for the U.S., the game winner against Honduras. And on the other semifinal, a thriller of 0-0, but all the way to penalties between Mexico and Costa Rica, and Los Ticos unfortunately lost in penalties 5-4. Mexico will be facing the U.S. men's national team in the final of the CONCACAF Nations League.
Yeah, look, this is a strange competition in the sense that this stems back from 2019, pre-pandemic. This is the final of a tournament that, should have been over a long time ago. But what I would say, despite the fact that we are ultimately going to end up where most people would have assumed we would have ended up with the U.S.-Mexico final in this Nations League as a whole, even going back to the fall of 2019, where, of course, Canada beat the U.S. in the group stage, and had they allowed just a couple less goals in that reverse fixture, they would have been playing Honduras yesterday. Right through to the fact that Costa Rica took this to penalties, that Honduras took it to the very brink. All of this suggests to me that CONCACAF is, in fact, getting closer. U.S. and Mexico probably still are the top two teams, but I think those results yesterday, despite the fact both got through, suggest to me that the final round of CONCACAF World Cup qualifying is going to be a lot closer than you suspect. And if you looked at the reaction to the U.S. fans yesterday to sort of the struggles they had against Honduras, there's a lot of them that still haven't quite learned the lesson from failing to qualify last time, that the U.S. isn't guaranteed anything in this region anymore.
And I don't even think it was the Honduras' best team. There's a few players from Honduras that are not even featured in this one that usually you do see, from Kyoto to a couple others. So, there's something there.
Yeah, and in fairness, the U.S. probably didn't have its full best team either, but they did have Pulisic and others there. So, But look, the World Cup qualifying, I believe, in CONCACAF is as wide open as it's perhaps been since the 98 cycle. And if you know the 98 cycle, that would have been...
We were close.
Yeah, well, we made the hex, Canada did.
Canada, you and I didn't. You and I had nothing to do with it. But Canada did. Speaking of Canada, Duane, they're facing Aruba tomorrow at 8 p.m. And later today, you and I will record a long overdue Two Salted Soccer podcast talking about Canada's World Cup qualifiers, looking at the Gold Cup that's going to happen next month, and also looking at a couple different news like Chris Armas and other things happening in the beautiful game, like Quentin Westberg's comments and all on the Two Salted Soccer podcast later today.
The Westberg comments may be a little bit overblown if the French speakers don't get as excited by it as English people.
Right. I told you. There's a little bit of things lost in translation. He used words that feels worse than it is. There's something called theater when we talk in French, where we just sometimes just make it sound a little better than it is.
Yeah, fair enough. I will still argue that there's something to talk about there, but nonetheless.
Oh yeah, no, of course.
quickly on Canada, if you're a Canadian fan listening to us out there right now, of course, we love our Canadian listeners and we have a lot of them. Suriname, Bermuda this afternoon. If you can find a stream out there, good luck. Let me know too, please, because that one might actually be as important to Canada's attempts to get out of this round, which they should anyway. But if Suriname were to drop points today, then I would suggest that it's pretty much over at that point. So.
Exactly. Let's talk about the Euro. 2 groups left in our group review. We're ending the week with this. Next week, we'll start to look in our ultimate preview show next Wednesday, heading into a day off, and then the opening ceremony and the new time for our show on Friday. Group E, Poland, Slovakia, Spain, and Sweden. Let's start with Poland, the best team. Well, maybe not. We'll see. Spain has something to do with it. But exactly. But in qualifying, Poland played 10 games, 8 win, 1 draw, 1 loss, 18 goals for, 5 goals against. Of course, Poland will go as far as Robert Lewandowski decides, or at least how much his 2 foot and his head scores is how far Poland will go.
Yeah, look, Golendowski, as they call him, as well, some people call him anyway. Poland's never really been able to take advantage of a generational player, and perhaps the best pure goal scorer in the world right now, and I'm including, the historic great there. But for sure, I think Spain's the favorite in the group. But I like Lewandowski. I watch a lot of Bayern games because of Davies, obviously, but I have developed a very soft spot for his game. I think he's greatly underappreciated. And look, the Euro is a tournament which can have some shocking and weird results. So if Poland is going to do something ever with this generational player, then I would suggest it's going to be at this stage, not necessarily at a World Cup level. Yeah. So, maybe watch that closely. And we got Sweden, which, obviously they've got an interesting player back, and you've got.
Well, he's injured, though.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
Sweden, no, Ibrahimovic has been ruled out of the Euro.
He has been pulled out. I apologize. Yes. I hadn't seen that in that news yet. But so that's probably actually beneficial to them, bluntly. We saw them in the last World Cup, though. Sweden was very solid, very defensively, very team-oriented. Slovakia, I'm sure, is going to be the same way. Spain is a country that, I think sometimes Spain suffers from its own past when it comes to our evaluation of them in tournaments. They aren't the Spain of 08, 10, 12. And it was unrealistic of us to expect them to be that ever again, because no national team really has been that before or after. But this is a very good Spanish team, just as you would expect. Yeah. And I would put them as favored in this group, but it is a pretty wide open, pretty solid across the board group.
Yeah. Let's continue now. Slovakia in Group E in qualifying. They were with Croatia, Wales, Hungary, and Azerbaijan. We'll talk about Hungary a little bit later. Slovakia, 8 games played, 4 wins, 1 draw, 3 losses for Slovakia. They did finish third of their group. They actually qualified through the Nations League qualifying process, but Slovakia making the dance is their reward here for Slovakia. Let's be quite fair here. And there'll be a battle between them and Sweden for that third spot. Maybe. We'll see. Poland might have something to do with it. I think Poland's going to be second in that group. I do feel Lewandowski will for sure score 3-4 goals in the group stage. And that could be enough. Like we've seen Denmark and Christensen. Christensen for Denmark propelled them a bit further than we thought. So you never know what can happen. But in qualifying, Spain did well. And that's another interesting topic when you mentioned Spain. Spain has no Real Madrid players, but that's okay. There's 2 Villarreal players. We've seen them perform well. They've won the Europa League. 8 wins, 2 draws, undefeated in 10 group game in qualifying. They were with Sweden, Norway, Romania, the Faroe Islands, and Malta. So Malta is considered one of the worst teams in the world, but hey, they got a win, sorry. So that's 1 win more than San Marino. So Malta over San Marino any day. But Spain, is it the Spain? It's a new generation of Spain, of course, and we're not talking about the tiki-taka and the perfect possession and the 6 years of the golden generation of Spain. We're talking about a new era of the Spain national team. Is there a ceiling for this team? Can they go far? Can they go as far as being called a contender?
Yeah, the ceiling is to win. It's Spain. Uh, that's it. They're immensely talented. Um, I wouldn't say they're the favorite. I wouldn't even say that they're in the top 3 or 4 favorites, but they're absolutely a team that has a chance. And if they were to win this tournament or go deep in this tournament, then certainly in a year and a half from now, and I can't believe that the Euro and the World Cup are only a year and a half apart, but at any rate.
Yeah, and they're only a year and a half because it's in Qatar. If not, they would be like a year apart. So
so this is going to be a sprint, including 2 Olympics and two major soccer tournaments within 2 years.
I'm laughing, but that's because I can't cry on air. So that's why my makeup is gonna leak if I cry. So that's why I'm just laughing.
So lots going to happen after lots didn't for a while, although it's been a bit of a grind lately. No, I like the Spanish team, and I like this whole Spanish Federation. When we talk about, speaking of other major tournaments, when we talk about the women's side of the game, they're right ready to burst out on that side. So, I mean, I know that's not relevant to this conversation necessarily.
No, I think it is relevant. I don't think it is irrelevant because there's correlations to be made now between the two, and I'm not so sure that the men's rejuvenation has nothing to do with how the women's also does with things, which sometimes you can learn things watching each other. And success attracts success regardless. And I do believe that.
Yeah, well, to jump ahead real quickly to Group F when we talk about France, I think the French women's program has always been instructive because of the way that they sort of develop them in the national center. Instructive of how good their overall system is, right? So if you see a women's program that is starting to succeed, especially from a traditional country, you can assume that maybe that infrastructure is allowing that to happen. So anyway, but I like the Spanish team. I think that they're a little bit underrated. If you're going to put a flyer, to talk wagering for a second, if you're going to put a flyer on not a big upset team, like if you want to chase the new Greece, like go ahead, but you're playing darts. But if you want to put money for some value, and I haven't seen their exact odds, but I'm guessing they're probably about 10-1. That's decent value. So, if you want to put a future bet in, for fun on this tournament, that's not a bad place to put it, I would say.
Yeah, no, it is. You're probably right on that, and we'll see what happens. Let's quickly finish with Sweden in Group E, and again, Ibrahimovic will be missing this after making a return to his national team. An injury late in the season will keep him away from this tournament. 10 games played for Sweden in qualifying in Group F. They finished second behind Spain. They were, of course, with Norway, Romania, the Faroe Islands, and Malta also. So Sweden is familiar with Spain. There's something there, and it's also a younger Sweden, no Ibrahimovic. But we'll see what they can do in this group. 6 games won, 3 draws, 1 loss in qualifying, 23 goals scored, 9 goals against for a 14-goal differential for Sweden in qualifying, like Duane mentioned. Let's transition to Group F in the Euro that has the World Cup champions in them, France, who's going to want to go one up than last Euro. They were, of course, finalists of Euro 2016 against Portugal. It's because it's 5 years ago, so it's like but we're Euro 2020, but we're in 2021. But France wants to go one up. We'll see if they can do that with this golden generation. In qualifying, France, Les Bleus were in Group H with Turkey, Iceland, Albania, Andorra, and Moldova. France played 10 games, 8 win, 1 draw, 1 loss, 25 goals for only. When we consider Italy and the Netherlands with their 37 and their 40, you might want to look also at their opponents, which is different. It's not as easy to score a couple goals against Turkey and Iceland than it is against other countries like San Marino. Only 6 goals conceded for France in this qualifying process for a differential of 19, which is not too shabby. They won their qualifying group.
Yeah, this is one heck of a group. I really like this French team. I picked the French team to win the World Cup in 2018. That didn't make me, a complete hipster, but they were a bit of an outsider at that point. They proved to be, I think, the most consistent and best team in the world throughout that tournament, and were deserving winners in the end. By the time that tournament wrapped up, no one was shocked that France won, right? So
no one would be shocked either that I don't remember half that day, but that's for another reason.
I do. I was in Prince Edward County in Picton. Watch it.
I was drunk.
Yeah. Watching it I was at a cottage with friends that didn't care, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we'll put the World Cup on," and they watched like 5 minutes, and they wandered in the backyard, and I was like just sitting there watching
You're like, okay, bye. Yeah, I'm good. You're like, Duane, you coming outside? I'm good, thanks.
Yeah,
I'm good.
So it's only 2 hours. I'll be out. Don't worry. Anyhow, yeah, they're just such a good team. But this is a group. This is a group, guys. And look, poor Hungary. But
they have three. Well, okay. One contender and two very good team in this, with, of course, Germany and Portugal. Let's look at Germany now before we continue, Duane. They were in Group C qualifying with Netherlands, Northern Ireland, Belarus, and Estonia. Estonia is playing Finland as we speak right now in an international friendly, in case you are wondering. But Germany, 8 games played in qualifying, 7 wins, 1 loss, 30 goals for, 7 goals against for Joachim Löw. His last dance as manager of Die Mannschaft.
And they've been not great, particularly not great for Germany. And we all know that they bowed out of 2018. Spectacular in the group stage. Speaking of remembering where you were, that one I will never forget either, because I was in a bar in Little Korea as the Koreans who were out eliminated Germany, and the Koreans were losing their mind. Anyway.
That's funny.
So the bars in Little Korea are always fun when people are losing their mind, because they lose their mind in a very passionate way. I don't want to stereotype here, but I've never had a bad time there. But anyhow, it's a team that has a lot to prove. Löw will want to go out in a high, but we're not sure whether he is even capable of that.
Are you saying that Joachim Löw wants to go out on a high?
Exactly.
Okay. I'll see myself out. I'll see you next week.
Exactly. I don't know what Germany is very unpredictable in this tournament. And it's interesting how they went from the highs of 2016 to 2014 to where they are now so quickly, and they moved up there just as quick too. It was like sort of it was a peak in a valley very, very fast.
Yeah,
right?
Let's not forget, though, they were very successful in 2008, and that's where maybe they began their rise, and then a little dip, then Spain, and then, it continued. But yeah. Right, so,
I don't know what to make of them, but they're the Germans. Like, the joke remains.
The joke remains. If there's penalties, don't count out the Germans.
Football is a game in which 22 men in short pants chase a ball for 90 minutes, and in the end, Germany wins. That's the joke. And, that there's a reason for it. Just as a reason for any joke.
Hungary in qualifying, they did qualify, by the way, through the Nations League 2. They finished 4th of their group of 5. So only Azerbaijan was worse than them. But they were with Croatia, Wales, Slovakia, and Azerbaijan in their group E of qualifying. But in this group F, we'll see what Hungary can do if they can actually finish 3rd. That's just, if they can win a game, that's already a big accomplishment. But in qualifying, 4 wins, 0 draw, 4 losses, 8 goals for, 11 goals against. Shout out to our friend Steven Sandor at Edmonton. It's not going to be easy for your Hungary team. And God, I hope we see Gabriel Gabor back with his, I don't know if it's Gabor, anyways. Him, the gray sweatpants, the goalie with the gray sweatpants. I hope he comes back this year. He must be 55 years old now, but I hope he comes back.
I think he's done now. But yes, if you don't remember, in the last Euros, there was everyone loved him because he reminded them of like their keeper.
Of your father. like that's my dad.
Yeah, well, your keeper on your Sunday league team, that's, you're, especially when you're younger, there's always inevitably your keeper will show up on one of the teams who's like 20 years older than everyone else and will somehow just be like the best keeper ever, because keeping's a brain, especially. Anyhow, I've always wondered this, just to make this, we're going to have a two solitudes later, but if Canada were to make a World Cup, if Canada gets to Qatar, I kind of want their group to look like this and them to be the Hungary in it, because there's nothing to lose, right? Like,
you're like, yeah, we lost 20-0 against France.
Well, you hope you don't do that, but if you have 3 games against like world-class teams and no one expects you to get a single point or even score a goal, anything you do is going to be a bonus. You're pressure-free. You can go and just have some fun and enjoy the spectacle of being part of the show. And if you're Hungary, who, obviously going way back when was the world's best team for a while, but it's been a long, long time since then. it's nice to get back to a major tournament. 2 out of the last 3, right? So they were late into this though. But look, there's nothing to lose. That's all you have to look at if you're Hungary, because the other 3 are all 3 teams that will go into this thinking that there's a pathway for them to win it.
Yeah, and Hungary will be like, well, we're just here to learn.
Yeah, and anything they do is a bonus.
Famously, the Soviets in 1972 have told Canada that they were there to learn before beating them 5-4 or something. That's hockey, though. That's our hockey reference of the day, Duane.
Yeah, there you go. Canada beat the team that is not called Russia for sure at the World Championships yesterday after almost being eliminated by losing to Latvia. So hockey's funny.
Hockey's weird, which is why we're talking about soccer. Last team of this Group F, last team we talk about in this group preview over the last couple days. Portugal finished second of their group in qualifying. In Group B, they were with Ukraine, Serbia, Luxembourg, and Lithuania. They played 8 games, 5 wins, 2 draws, 1 loss for Portugal, 22 goals for, 6 goals against, a 16 differential, best of their group, but still finished second because Ukraine had 1 more win in the qualifying round. Portugal looks at this with multiple ways, saying, hey, we can finish third and we can still win this tournament. We've seen this happen in the past.
Yeah, that just 4 years ago. I mean, Portugal's a very small country, and it's a country that, well, I'm talking to you from the heart of Little Portugal in Toronto. If you don't know Toronto, there's like a 20-block radius in which there are quite literally 15,000 to 20,000 Portuguese immigrants that live here. It is very common for me to hear Portuguese spoken as a first choice in the neighborhood I'm in. And that speaks to what Portugal is, too. It's a country in which a lot of people have left. So for them to have won a European championship is remarkable and speaks to how passionate they are about the game. And that, will affect my work habits in the next couple of weeks whenever they play. There's a, Hong Kong is a joke here in Toronto. We know we're referring to Portugal during a World Cup or a Euro. Also Portugal.
Yeah.
Get made fun of for in the World Cup. The joke was always that in Little Portugal, all the Portuguese flags would go down the moment they were eliminated, and they'd all instantly be replaced by Brazilian flags. But
that's mean.
It's a little true.
It's yeah, and you can say it now because they won the Euro 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
But look, it's a country that punches above its weight. But so you don't want to discount them. It does seem, however, that they might have peaked. They probably peaked before 2016.
Yeah, and they got lucky on that one day. Can you imagine? They played that finals without Ronaldo for an hour, and they still won the damn thing. Anyways.
Yeah, and maybe that actually helped them in some ways, too.
You don't have someone yelling at you to give me the ball for an hour.
Well, it simplified it too, because when you have a Ronaldo, you're always looking to get him especially then, you're always looking to get him the ball and to try and.
Because otherwise he's there yelling at you, give me the ball. Otherwise I'm taking your wife. He's like, you got a choice. You give me the ball or I'm taking your wife and your kids.
Yeah, allowed them to just be defensive and hope. And, they did pluck it off as extra time, was it not? I'm trying to remember. I don't know.
Eder scored in extra time and then running off the field, and you see the French players collapse. Fun times for someone with French descendants.
Yeah, it seems like that's so long ago, man.
It's 5 years ago, but Griezmann looked so young. Oh, wait, he still looks so young.
Yeah, no, that is a funny little quirk about this tournament. Not to belabor it, but it's been an extra year. We are not supposed to be here. This is supposed to be, players are supposed to have retired from international service. So you have slightly older teams across the board because they all stuck around for one more year. It's going to make the build for the year and a half to Qatar interesting too, because especially if you have a team that does well in this tournament and you have a guy that's maybe 30, 31, 32 that's still contributing at a club level that normally would have retired, they might stick around even longer, which is going to make the next generation interesting. Everything's affected by this, right? And having played for this long, it's wow.
Exactly, and we'll see. Maybe teams that would have done great last year, now a year later, they won't. There's definitely going to be correlation with the postponement with how they play on the field. Example, a team like Germany, who's not that young, a year is a whole long time. A year and a half ago or something, Mesut Ozil was still kind of that type. Now we're never going to see Ozil play with the German national team. There's a lot of things like this, and it'll be interesting to see how that year affects everyone. On that note, Duane and I will take the weekend to look at everything surrounding the Euro and the beautiful game and the world of football with a soccer perspective. World Cup qualifying this weekend. Canada's playing, of course, and CONCACAF, and we're going to follow all these games. We'll have a Two Solitudes later today. We'll probably have a Two Solitudes at some point next week, reviewing some Canada games and getting ready for next month. But as always, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kev Laramie. We hope you're enjoying Euro today. Thank you for subscribing to our podcast. Anywhere you get your podcasts, we're already 3 versions of Euro Today are in the top 100 soccer podcasts in North America, and that's because of all of you fans subscribing, downloading, and rating and reviewing this show. Thank you very much. But as always, until next time, have a great soccer.